Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is HarrisX founder and CEO, Dritan Nesho. Dritan, thank you so much for joining me.
Great to be back. Thanks for having me.
I think really what can only be described as tariff whiplash has happened in the past week, so I do want to go through a loose timeline in case anyone blinked and missed it. So first, April 2nd was dubbed Liberation Day by President Trump. That's when he unveiled his sweeping tariff policy. The market reaction was swift. Trillions was lost globally, stocks plunged, trade wars escalated, and fears of a recession dramatically increased. They officially went into effect after the clock struck midnight on Wednesday, and by Wednesday afternoon, President Trump announced a pause on most of the tariffs. A 10% baseline tariff, though, has remained, and then he ratcheted up the trade war with China. So I want to talk about, you have some numbers of Trump's approval and where it stood after the tariff announcement. What can you tell us?
Well, there were a lot of signs, hazard signs, I would call them, that were flashing bright yellow and again beginning to flash red. And it wasn't just the signal and the message that the bond markets sent to the president that investors were really pulling out of those bond markets, even for safety, and major holders of US debt like Japan were doing the same. But really, the president's approval numbers, job approval numbers, and his standing with voters was starting to take a hit very quickly because of the tariffs announcement. When we spoke right before the announcement, we said that the president, to begin with, had a very short runway when it came to these tariffs. And frankly, he ran out of that runway, at least for the time being, which is why it forced his hand on this 90-day pause. Um, Bottom line, on April the 2nd, when the president announced the tariffs, he was at 52% approval with voters, above 50%, and a high approval for Trump historically, close to where he started off uh, the year when he was sworn in as president. And by yesterday, that approval rating had fallen to 47%. So full 5 points across the board in a matter of a week. And even in a matter of a couple of weeks, his approval on handling the economy, which is the number one reason why voters voted for Trump, has decreased by 6 points. He was at 50% approval with regards to the economy on the 21st of March. And as of yesterday, that approval is below 44%. So the president got a series of signals, both from the markets and voters. And these are two of his prime and two of his favorite stakeholders. So to some extent, he was forced to listen, and he was forced to hit the pause button and reassess the tariffs policy going forward.
It seems from what you're saying that his approval rating and the stock market really trended in the same direction since his tariff announcement, which was down. And you and I spoke right after he started his second term, and I believe that one of the terms in our headline was record high approval rating in around February. Is it precedented to see the approval rating of a president go down so dramatically in just 1 week?
Well, yes, it's precedented and it has happened before. What Trump has to be careful of is that this doesn't become his Afghanistan moment. And what I mean by that is that when you look at President Biden's approval ratings, his approval was above 50% from his own inauguration in 2021 up until the Afghanistan pullout or debacle in August, and when he fell a full 10 points, if not more. And he never really recovered from that for the rest of his administration. So both the markets and leadership, to some extent, are a confidence game. And it was clear that this tariff policy were eroding confidence in Trump's ability to manage the economy, the whole reason why he was voted in. And you have to be very careful not to lose the confidence of voters, because regaining it is significantly harder than just preserving it. And as I said, a lot of signals were pointing in the wrong direction, right? On April the 2nd, um, 48% of Americans were saying that the economy is on the wrong track. Uh, by April the 7th, that number was 54%. So fairly significant jump of 6 points. When you look at the direction of the country on April the 2nd, more voters were saying the country's headed in the right direction. Uh, uh, Today, 51% of voters, the majority, are now saying that the country's headed in the wrong track, and that measure has jumped by a full 8 points. 66% of voters today say that the state of the economy is weak. When Trump took office, actually, those perceptions around the economy started to turn in the right direction. And in a similar fashion, we track whether or not voters are saying that their personal financial situation is improving or getting worse. And we really saw within a week a jump in those who are saying that their personal financial situation is getting worse. So when it comes to the confidence game of the relationship between the leader elected for a set of reasons by the voters and the way that voters are perceiving the performance of the leader, there was a very fast decrease in voters thinking that tariffs are an effective economic and foreign policy. Again, on April the 2nd, 57% said that tariffs are effective as a form of policy. By the middle of this week, that number had decreased to 49%, with actually a majority of 51%, a very slight majority, starting to say it's not effective. So when it comes to that confidence game, it started to erode for Trump. And secondly, these are not the core reasons why voters voted Trump in. They voted him in to handle inflation. They voted him in to manage the economy better than the Democrats and better than Biden was managing the economy. They voted him in to fix immigration, where he's actually getting very high approval ratings, above 50%. But tariffs were never the voters' favorite policy. And again, for all of these reasons combined together, Trump was forced to hit pause. And it's to be seen now what happens with tariffs as a policy. Will voters give the administration a second bite at the apple, because the administration is able to show some wins around the tariffs policy that it has already implemented? Or is this a done deal and we're unlikely to see another strong push of across the board, quote unquote, reciprocal tariffs?
With economists I've talked to, as well as economists' general commentary on the tariffs, they said the chance of a recession was more likely or not. And in fact, some said, hey, we are definitely going to head into a recession this year unless President Trump finds that off-ramp. And it seems as of Wednesday, he did find that off-ramp in largely pausing the tariffs. But did voters consider a recession as a real possibility? What did that look like?
Yeah, an overwhelming amount of voters actually said that the tariffs on imported goods will cause a short-term recession. That was 71% of the overall public or overall voters, but it also included 79% of business decision makers, 74% of investors, and importantly, 70% of independents, and also 60% of Republicans, actually. So across the board, everyone was expecting a recession. They were feeling anxious about the state of the economy. 72% expected higher prices. And in a signal that is even more worrying for the administration, is that they actually expected the long-term impact of tariffs on the economy to lead to economic decline rather than growth. 53% started to say it would lead to economic decline. Only 47% were saying it will lead to growth. And while the president maintained the support of Republicans, 76% said it will lead to growth, and they are squarely on the side of the president. Almost all other audiences were very, very concerned and very cautious about what this would mean, including investors or stock owners, which were split 50-50 on what the long-term impact would be. So there was a lot of anxiety, and anxiety is never good in the markets and certainly never good with voters.
Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said on Wednesday morning, and this was a couple hours after the tariffs went into effect, that CEOs are telling him, hey, the economy is in pretty good shape here. They weren't too concerned. He also said that the tariff policy was for Main Street. It's Main Street's turn now. Wall Street has had their turn for years. What is, from this poll, what is the sense from business leaders, small and medium-sized businesses? Did they have more confidence in the tariff policies opposed to Wall Street?
They did. Business leaders in general were more favorable towards the president than investors were and the general public. And that makes sense, right? Because for most small and medium-sized businesses across the country, some form of protectionism would support their competitiveness or their ability to grow market share. But obviously, there's a difference between Wall Street or business leaders of the Fortune 100 companies, which do business globally, which were all ringing the alarm bells, and most of the business leaders in Main Street, which had approached a wait-and-see opportunity. I think concerning for the administration was the fact that people actually did not believe that the markets would bounce back quickly enough from tariffs. And essentially, the majority expected the bounce back to take a year or longer, with the BDMs really being that exception. 52% of them, the business decision makers, 52% of them said it will bounce back in 3 months to a year or less. Everyone else actually expected the recovery period to be slow and to be protracted. And consumers had started to factor that in. So while they were saying that they were still purchasing everyday goods like groceries, beverages, clothing, and shoes as usual, they actually said that they were starting to hold back on upgrading their phones, buying consumer electronics, household appliances, buying a new car, and buying luxury goods. And we're talking about, close to 7 in 10 of consumers saying, for example, they were holding back on buying a new car or buying luxury goods. So the impact to the economy was starting to be felt by a cooling effect of sorts with consumers. And that's always concerning and worrying as well. And I'll say one other thing, which is when you ask people, do the tariffs go too far or do they not go far enough or are they about right? Close to 50% said that the tariffs go too far. About a third said about right, and only about 20% said that they did not go far enough. So there was this consensus that Trump was being very heavy-handed right out of the gate. And this was leading to a lot of unnecessary instability, a lot of anxiety, and that, frankly, was going to boomerang or backfire because consumers and voters had started to say that we don't quite think that the tariffs will have the effect that Trump intends, which is to get other countries to give us concessions because he has gone too far. 57% were actually doubting whether it would have the intended effect. And that was a significant shift from before April the 2nd, when you had really 53 to 55% that said the opposite or held the opposite view. They were thinking that, tariffs could work. It's something new. It's something different. Maybe we should let Trump try it out. So the heavy-handed component did not help the administration. The fact that there wasn't a lot of structure in the rollout of these tariffs also didn't help.
To the point about not a lot of structure in the rollout, the White House was saying up until President Trump announced this pause, we will not pause. There will be no pause on tariffs. Even an economist I talked to yesterday morning before the pause said President Trump is not changing his tune. Obviously, we saw the president change his tune. There's reporting that the bond market reaction had something to do with it. When President Trump was asked, he said, hey, I saw people get queasy. I saw people get yippy about what they were seeing about the economy. Did people want him to change course here? Because there's been two arguments. Supporters of President Trump have said, hey, this is the art of the deal. People who weren't so supportive, who were a little more critical, said, hey, it really looks like the president blinked here. Did they want him to stand firm in this tariff policy, or did they want him to bend a bit and to pause? What's your general consensus from these numbers?
Well, right now, where we stand is that voters are quite split again, as I said, on whether or not tariffs are an effective foreign and economic policy or not. And they clearly believe that it causes instability. They clearly believe that it will lead to higher prices, and those are um, not good expectations to have for the administration. And certainly, the fact that they don't believe that it will lead to significant economic growth, but rather it will lead to economic decline, is problematic, right? Because the whole people of the administration was that this might trigger a short-term recession. It will be painful in the short term, but we're going to bounce back. And in that way, then they would expect to do well in the midterms, which are just around the corner. That said, voters still think that tariffs will create more jobs than they'll take away. Voters still believe, and this is close to 50% of all voters, that it will increase revenues for the U.S. Treasury rather than the 3 in 10 that says that it will decrease revenues. So in some regard, Trump did communicate clearly what the tariffs are for. They're about jobs and protecting jobs, and they're about raising money for the U.S. government. So the balance here really is in which of these set of arguments will win with voters. And we have to see what the administration will announce, whether there are any wins, bilateral trade agreements that bring tariffs down to zero for both parties, as the president has entertained possibly with Europe, and as the European commissioners have said that they'd be open to doing, and whether or not he can reach deals with the likes of Japan and Vietnam and others. So it's yet to be seen. But right now, public opinion is quite split. And the reason public opinion is where it is because of the tumult that was created over the span of a week with tariffs that the public clearly sees as being too heavy-handed, and also not having been rolled out in a structured way and in a way that would get to the intended goals.
Well, it certainly remains to be seen if his approval rating, like the stock market, starts to make a bit of a rebound. And I know you will have the numbers soon enough on that as we see the impacts of this tariff whiplash. Until then, Dritan, Nesho, I look forward to the conversation. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.